Welcome to tonight's Fine Arts Center presentation. Here, all are welcomed and all belong. Please note the location of the exits nearest to your seat. In the event of an alarm, please remain calm and leave the building. The ushers will direct you. If you need special assistance during an emergency, please contact your usher. At this time, please turn off all mobile devices out of consideration for those on stage and your fellow audience members. The use of cameras and recording devices is strictly prohibited. Before we begin, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the University of Massachusetts Amherst was founded and built on the unceded homelands of the Po-Cum-Tuck Nation on the land of the Norwottuck community. We begin with gratitude for nearby waters and lands. We recognize these lands and waters as important relations with which we are all interconnected and depend on to sustain life and well-being. The Po-Cum-Tuck had connections with these lands for millennia. Over 400 years of colonization. When Po-Cum-Tuck peoples were displaced, many joined their Algonquian relatives to the east, south, west, and north. That includes Mashpee and Aquinnah Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Narragansett, Mohegan, Pequot, and Mohican communities, and Abenaki and other nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. These native peoples still maintain connections and relationships of care for these lands today. We also acknowledge that the University of Massachusetts Amherst is a land-grant university. As part of the Morrill Land Grant Act, portions of land from 84 native nations west of the Mississippi were sold to provide the resources to found and build this university. As an active first step towards decolonization, we encourage you to learn more about the native nations whose homelands UMass Amherst now resides on, and the indigenous homelands on which you live and work. We also invite you to deepen your relationship to these living lands and waters. Thank you, and enjoy the program.
Good morning, folks. My name is Michael Sakamoto. I'm the Performing Arts Curator and the Director of the Asian and Asian American Arts and Culture program at the UMass Fine Arts Center. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you this morning to an artist conversation with Larissa FastHorse and Michael John Garcés. Before we begin, just a couple of quick thank yous and acknowledgements. Today's event is part of this, sorry, I've got too many things in my hand. This series, which is now an annual series, which we're all very proud of, called Art Sustainability Activism. And it started a couple years ago in, I guess, fall of 2019 as a collaboration partnership between three entities on campus: the Fine Arts Center, the School of Earth and Sustainability, and the MFA for Poets and Writers. That was around a Philip Glass presentation of Philip's reunion tour, I guess it was, for the live score of Koyaanisqatsi. And we decided as a collective, hey, you know, this is an amazing thing, because we also had book signings. We also had the premiere of the Paperbark journal. We had guest writers and scientists and other artists, and and panel conversations like the one Larissa and Michael will be with Abigail on Thursday. And this is obviously the climate crisis is not going away, but the climate crisis is also a way to it's an entry point to also additional and further and complementary conversations around sustainability, not just environmental, but cultural sustainability. Questions around what does it mean to be an activist artist, and what does it mean to contribute to a public discourse around all of these issues. And a campus like UMass is, we feel a perfect place to do that for sort of obvious, research and educational institution reasons. So we've done this every year. We've had other great artists like Miwa Matreyek, the intermediate artists, and last year we had the touring show of Pacific and Indian Ocean island performing artists, Small Island Big Song, that was last March. And each year, again, we have a circle of events, of readings, of publishing, and of panel conversations, interdisciplinary. So this year is no different. If any of you haven't picked up this poster flyer, this really beautiful poster flyer we created, there's a few left on the rack over here. We had a panel conversation last week with Pangea World Theater and Double Edge Theater, talking about their work, their very engaged theater work on racial and environmental justice. Is Abigail here? Oh, hi. Different hairdo from the photo. Abigail Chabitnoy? Okay. A wonderful poet and writer, had a reading at Old Chapel on Thursday, and then, of course, Larissa and Michael are here with us for about 10 days in residence. I'll let you guys kind of explain more about the project that you're doing. And please also remember, if you can make it this Thursday, October 6th at 4 o'clock, right here in the lobby of the Bromry Center, will be the Archives of the Future panel. And that's the theme for this year, Archives of the Future, and we can kind of unpack that a little more. Also to absolutely acknowledge our co-presenting, co-sponsoring organizations, the Native Advisory Council. Is anybody here from Native Advisory Council? Okay, well, they're big supporters. The Office of the Provost, as well as the World Studies Interdisciplinary Project. Are Lori or Mwangi here? Hey. Nice to see you. Sorry? Oh no, oh no, okay, yeah, it's still going around. If I wasn't moderating, I'd be wearing my mask. So let's see, what else can I tell you? Okay, that's it. Enough with the boring sort of procedural stuff. I'm gonna read you what I'm going to try on the fly to do abbreviated bios for Larissa and Michael, just to make it not academic, but also because there is so much. I could read for like 5-10 minutes on each of them. I'm going to try and do some quick highlights. So, Larissa FastHorse, tell me if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Sichangu, Lakota Nation. Is a 2020 MacArthur Fellow award-winning writer and co-founder of Indigenous Direction, the nation's leading consulting company for Indigenous arts and audiences. Her satirical comedy, The Thanksgiving Play, produced by Playwrights Horizon and Geffen Playhouse, is currently one of the top 10 most produced plays in America. She's the first Native American playwright in the history of American theater on that list. Additional recent produced plays include What Would Crazy Horse Do from Kansas City Rep, Landless and Cowpie Bingo from Alter Theater, Average Family with the Children's Theater Company of Minneapolis, Teaching Disco Square Dancing to Our Elders, the class presentations with Native voices at the Autry, and many more. Over the past several years, Larissa has created a nationally recognized trilogy of community-engaged plays with Cornerstone Theater Company, the company that Michael is artistic director of. I'm going to kind of skip describing that because you guys will probably talk about how that project is developed. Larissa's radical inclusion process with Indigenous tribes has been honored with prestigious national arts funding from MacArthur, Creative Capital, the MAP Fund, NEFA, First Peoples Fund, the NEA, Our Town Grant, Mellon Foundation, Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, and others. Michael John Garcés has been a Cornerstone Ensemble member since 2006. Michael's directing credits at the company include The Rivers Don't Know by James McManus, produced by City Theater Company at Pittsburgh Playhouse. Highland Park is Here by Mark Valdez, a virtual production subsequently produced at the Latino Theater Company's Reencuentro 2021, and the Highland Park Independent Film Festival, and also International Community Arts Festivals in Singapore and Rotterdam. Native Nation, which is a collaboration with Larissa and Urban Res as well. The Tempest by Alison Carey, and so many more plays. Michael has developed and directed several works as well with the acclaimed spoken word and theater and dance artist Mark Bamuthi-Joseph. The Just and the Blind with Daniel Bernard Roumain, which toured to Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, and Arts Emerson. Pelota, a football Freedom Suite, premiered at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts and subsequently toured. Red, Black, and Green, a blues. Oh, you directed that. That is like one of my favorite shows ever. I didn't know that. Oh my God. Okay, sorry, I had a fanboy moment. I've totally lost my way in this bio. I don't know. Okay, he's done a lot of things, which I can't read the rest of this. Let's just get into this. Thank you. I love that show. Oh my God. Okay, let me put my glasses on too so I can read what I wrote. I don't have to hold this at arm's length anymore. Actually, let me also just say, mention, so thank you also to Cornerstone Theater Company, which is sort of the holding, I guess, I don't know, sort of holding partner organization for the residency as well. So Cornerstone's mission is to collaborate with communities, and their work reflects complexity, disrupts assumptions, welcomes difference, and amplifies joy. They aim to advance a more compassionate, equitable, and just world. For my money, Cornerstone is the community-based and community-engaged theater company in Southern California. So again, Michael can talk more about that. So let's start sort of cliche with a typical first question. How did you, tell us a little bit about your background. How did your work or your respective works come into being? And maybe you can talk a little bit about early inspirations or motivations as well, and maybe about how your work is developed, just so people have a little bit of a context.
Just in terms of in general, you mean, or?
Or you specifically, or if you want to talk about Cornerstone, it's up to you.
Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about Cornerstone. Cornerstone's a community-engaged theater company, as Michael said. It was started in 1986. By some Harvard grads, specifically the founders of Bill Rausch and Alison Carey. We're taking a theater class in which I think Robert Brustein posited that theater was dead, essentially. It's a museum art form, and not relevant to contemporary life. And so they decided to undertake a project to sort of test that hypothesis. And their hypothesis was actually that it could be relevant in people's lives. And what they set out to do was do theater in places in the United States where theater hadn't happened, at least as a practice or as a professional practice, in at least many generations, if ever. So they focused on small towns, and they were just a bunch of students who got into a bus and went to different, called up, got the phone book out because there's no interwebs then, and reached out to people to see if they could maybe sleep at a school or something and make a play. And they started doing that. They were doing classics. Bill was a director. They didn't have any playwrights. And they'd show up in a town and make a play. But they'd cast local people because they didn't have enough people to fill the cast. And people started pushing back and saying, well, why are we doing this play? And why is it like this? Why is it in this language? And at first they were a little resistant to that. And then they finally started listening. And I would say Cornerstone developed over time a practice of listening, right? And after several years of doing that, they wound up going to Los Angeles and having that be their base of operations. And there was a lot of pushback and challenges as to why a group of white people was going into communities and doing this work. And that led to a whole, I think, moment for the company to really look into its own identity and diversify pretty radically. This was in the early 90s. And they also started getting pushback from artists as they brought other people to collaborate who wanted to write original plays. And there was a whole process that came organically to the company of having conversations with people in circles, what became to be called story circles, which was not original to Cornerstone. It's the Junebug Theater in New Orleans, was really certainly the inspiration to Cornerstone in terms of their practice. Roadside Theater does them as well. Several theaters that came out of the 60s and 70s. But Cornerstone sort of developed its own idiosyncratic practice of doing that. And has become, over time, more and more collaborative, seeking to sort of decenter sort of, or at least not have a top-down process and have sort of decenter the process so that we're really truly in a circle with community members. And I think the work that we've been doing with Larissa over the past decade has really pushed us into further decentering our practices. We've begun to a process of sort of decolonizing our practice. And that has been extremely fruitful and quite impactful in the company's work. And we work with communities of all kinds, defined by geography, defined by culture, defined by language, defined by job, defined by issue, et cetera, and I could go into more detail. But that's essentially the really basic story of Cornerstone. And in my own practice, I was doing a lot of directing, and I was based in New York, and doing stuff in all kinds of places I was privileged to work at. It was pretty great, working with great artists, and I was feeling really disconnected from audience and wondering why I was doing it. And I got invited by a really brilliant artist named Ralph Lee, who was a puppeteer, who had come out of Bread and Puppet, but had his own company for many years. He was really quite wonderful. Who had been working down in Chiapas, Mexico, with a company called Snatzi Bahom. They're a Mayan writers collective, making big, giant puppet plays. And they wanted to act, and Ralph didn't know anything about acting. And so he said, "Do you want to go down?" And so I didn't have any gigs that summer. I said, sure. And I wound up just taking a plane. The communication was terrible, so I figured I'd just show up in Chiapas. The worst that would happen was I would just travel around Chiapas for 7 weeks and get back on the other plane. But we wound up doing a piece, and I could go into more detail about that. But that sort of started to really change my perspective on how to impact audience and why I was doing the work. And that journey ultimately led me to Cornerstone. And I will pass it to Larissa.
Sorry, can I ask you a quick, just because there's a lot of students here in the audience, you mentioned doing decolonizing work. Can you kind of just give a quick and dirty sort of like definition or framing on what you mean when you say decolonizing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can mean a lot of things, and I think it has meant a lot of things in our practice and in our process and in our journey, really. I will give a funny example. The first play we were doing was a play in which there was a lot of simultaneity. We'd have 4, 5, 6 things going on at the same time in a circle, and the audience just had to pick and choose, and since it was immersive, you really had to walk over, lean into something to follow it, and then all of it had to shift at the same time, and something else needed to happen altogether, and then it would be asynchronous, and then there'd be this moment where it changed. And so figuring out how to rehearse that was really challenging when they were all going on at the same time. And so there was a bell in the rehearsal room I started using, and I'd go ding when it was time to change. And I did it a couple times, and then I was about to do my ding again, and Larissa tackled me and said, "Could we please stop with the bell? I'm feeling like my soul is oppressed by your bell." And we found a rattle, and it was much better. And again, listening to people and changing it. So that is, a funny version of it. But I would say, even much more deeply in our process now, we're very careful to ask people what we should do next. Cornerstone never quite done a process where we enter into a community completely open to what the outcome might be. It does not have to be a play. It does not even have to be a performance necessarily. And every step of the way, it's constantly making sure that circle is continuous and making sure that other people are in leadership in the room and not simply the people who are bringing their particular skills as practitioners to the room. Certainly making decisions and leading when it's appropriate, but asking when and whether it's appropriate. Every decision, which direction the circle should go, et cetera, is a community decision. It is not our decision. And when the community can't come to a decision itself, finding a process with the community that makes sense for the community to make that decision. If there's someone we should go to, an elder, et cetera, finding out who we should speak to and then how it's appropriate to approach that person. And that is just a level of letting go of assumptions, letting go of knowing, letting go of expertise that I think Cornerstone have been working towards sort of blindly, and that we've done more consciously in the last 10 years.
Hey, friends. Hey, for the people in person, I have a really hard time listening over the speaker thing. I don't know about you, but I just start zoning out. So I apologize, but we're doing this for the folks that are online, so we have to speak into this. But I just want to acknowledge that I know the sounds of speakers and people talking puts me to sleep. So no problem. If you want to take a nap, go for it. I understand. Because I really had to focus. Anyway, so I'm from the Sicangu Lakota Nation, which is in South Dakota, where I grew up. And I started my career real quick as a classical ballet dancer, very rare one. I was put into ballet. There's a whole play about that coming up. But I was put into ballet as physical therapy because of some problems I had with my legs. And fell in love with it. And against many odds that you can hear about in my 90-minute play, ended up becoming a professional ballet dancer, one of the not only, but very few in the United States in classical ballet as a Balanchine dancer. And so that was my specific niche in ballet, which just happened, and only because it happened to work well with the physical limitations I had. Balanchine actually disguised them. His technique disguised them in a way that worked really well for me, that I know wasn't good for a lot of people physically, but for me actually made ballet work. So it was really awesome. So I did that for 10 years professionally, and then I, like every dancer, I was retired at 30, going, well, shoot, I have zero skills, I didn't go to college, I have nothing else to do. I tried teaching, wasn't ready to give my life to teaching yet. I still had things I wanted to say for myself. I tried choreography, I did a little bit of that. I tried musical theater, that was, I do not have the personality for musical theater to do the same. I mean, I admire it greatly, but the rigor of doing the same show hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, if you're lucky, I just didn't have that in me. After ballet, where you do a new show every 6 weeks, you start new work. And so, being on, I did a super embarrassing show in Europe. I'm going to tell you because it's out there. I did Fame the musical, and I was the bitchy white ballerina that was like super racist, whose role was cut out when they came to the United States, interestingly. But I was in Europe. We did the first European tour before it came to the U.S. And so they dyed my hair blonde and blah, blah, blah. So I did that, and we did like over 400 shows in 10 months, and I just couldn't. So artistically, I realized that wasn't going to be my gig, which I always thought it would. And then I found, through a long process with career transitions for dancers and a career counselor over several years, I found writing. Something I'd always done, but not in an organized way. And script writing made the most sense because I was living in Los Angeles, where my husband was from. So I worked in film and TV first, entirely self-taught. I've never taken a writing class. In fact, in my one attempted year at college, I got the flu in the placement class for the writing, and so they stuck me in remedial writing because I didn't finish my essay because I had 106-degree fever. I was really, really sick. So they put me in this remedial class to learn how to write a letter. How do you format a letter? How do you format a resume? So I've never had, so I didn't get to take a writing class. I was really excited to take my first writing class, and they wouldn't let me. But the TA was really nice. He let me. He's like, look, if you just grade other people's stuff, I'll give you an A. So I didn't have to. I still haven't even done a remedial writing class. Anyway, all that to say, and he, ironically, at a huge university of 50,000 people, he was the one who had read my essay. And he's like, it started so good, and it just fell apart. It's like, this woman doesn't know anything. So he's the one that stuck me in his class. Anyway, all that to say, I'm self-taught and worked in film and television. I did my own apprenticeship as an intern, working for an incredible mentor, and I lied to get my internship. You had to be in a university program to get a paid internship at Universal Studios, so I made up a program. I shouldn't be telling any of you this, but here we are. I made up a program. I had my acting teacher was I didn't know theater, I didn't know college words, so my acting teacher is my dean of students, and my ballet teacher was my academic advisor. And they had, I gave them their numbers, and they're ready. Unfortunately, the school had just gone under, so you couldn't visit it. It was in Los Angeles and Santa Monica, and it just closed. So you had to call them on their private numbers, et cetera. Anyway, no one checks your references, and they hired me. And I was working for the senior vice president of Universal Pictures, and I confessed on my first day, and I said, hey, look, I need you to know I made all this up because I want to be a writer and I want to learn how to write. And Hollywood's the one place where if you lie and succeed, you're like a hero. So they were like, that's the best thing I've ever heard. That's amazing. So he became my mentor, and stayed with this man named Lenny Kornberg, and stayed my mentor for many, many years. I moved through that. Anyway, moved in film and TV, very depressed, very frustrated with the representation of indigenous people. ultimately got commissioned to write my first play, and theater was ready to do things differently, to represent Indigenous peoples the way I wanted to hire all the consultants I insist that they hire, to work directly with the local community in the way I insist they work with local community. If you do my work, you always have, from the very first play, you have to hire other Indigenous people in every season I'm in. If I'm working on a new play with you, you have to have other Indigenous art in that season, and you have to work with local Indigenous peoples in some way. And so theater was ready to do that in a way that film and TV wasn't. So that's where I've been ever since. And then I found Michael. Michael commissioned me with Cornerstone Theater Company to do a play with them 10 years ago now. I said, we see that picture, we're like, oh, that's during our first play, the one that keeps popping up on the little screen over there. And like when we were young kids, just had no idea that we'd still be here 10 years and 6 plays later. That we, working with, I will say what was great about working with Cornerstone was that it took what I was already doing naturally as an Indigenous woman in theater, and then it gave me, the Cornerstone methodology gave me what is that, like a methodology, haha, there you go. It gave me a methodology for how to do that and to how to express that to people and to communities when I walked in. It was a little more organized than just me saying, you should do this. I got to kind of have that level of almost a distance of being able to say, okay, this is how we do things, and then and this is how we create a circle that gives this constant feedback that Michael was just talking about. And then as we've worked together over all these years, as he said, then we've been affecting each other. So Cornerstone gave me that first sort of formality of what I do, formalizing it in a way, and then we've been able to, together, Michael and I as collaborators, continue to evolve all of our practices together. That was a lot, sorry.
That was amazing. So a lot of that immediately makes me wonder, and again, because we have this this learning audience here, I think what a lot of audiences and a lot of the public don't understand, I don't want to say fail to understand, but just simply don't understand, is what they've internalized. So I asked you, for example, earlier to maybe give a quick context of what does it mean, what does decolonizing mean? What is decolonization? And I think for a mainstream audience, it's the same thing with understanding, non-Western ways of expressing and forms of knowledge, epistemologies, and so forth. Maybe can you be a little maybe more specific for the folks here on what your approach is as a Native or Indigenous artist? And then Michael also as a collaborator and an ally as well, an artist and activist ally in these efforts. And what does it mean to work, specifically through that lens and to center, that way of being, and the type of art and performance and quote unquote theater that comes out of that. It may look and feel like theater that we recognize, but fundamentally, there's something shifted. There's something that's actually fundamentally different about the experience. So maybe you can kind of crack that egg open a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll start. I'm holding this. Michael and I talk a lot about our process being our artwork, right? So our process of how we work and engage in community is the thing. There might be a thing, like you said, a theater thing, a thing at the end. There might not. So far, folks have asked for some sort of thing to happen because people are proud of their work and want to share it, but it doesn't. That's not our goal. And I think that's a big, what Michael talked about a little bit already, but that's a big difference for us, because the arts have always been an extraction industry with Indigenous people. They come in and they take writers, nonfiction, fiction, theater, film, TV, fine art, all these folks, they come in and they take things, they extract it, and they go off and they profit. It's as much an extraction industry as oil, the gold, all the things. And that's the industry we work in, and the arts. And, academia has been a really deadly extraction industry. So we are trying our best to, the skills for whatever reason we've been given, and the privilege and the access we've been given is through the arts, through performing arts. And so we try to take those and flip that paradigm into using the arts to support community as opposed to extract from community. And so when we come into a community, everything we're doing is trying to constantly be of service. That's what we endlessly say. How can we be of service? Use the skills we have that happen to be arts-based. Although sometimes we're asked to use very different skills. We're asked to use skills of serving dinners. We're asked to use questionable skills of using power tools to winterize elders' homes, which is not Michael's forte, but he really worked hard at it. It was like, we learned there's a reason you're not in production. We're asked to use other skills or to, because we live in Los Angeles, a place of great wealth and stuff and excess, that we're asked to collect clothing for children that are placed in emergency foster care without any clothes and toys or anything when they're taken from their parents at 10 o'clock at night on the reservation. We're asked to use our skills in other ways. And so those are all our, what we do in our art. That's all with art making, right? Using all of the skills that we have available. And then sometimes we're asked to come in and do theater. We do a lot of theater workshops and camps and things for folks of all ages. We don't charge for any of this. That's our way, again, of using our art to support the community. And I was going to say with all of that, so that's something, another thing though that is really difficult, I will say, about this work, even though we're both going into it fully with this intention and desire, and it gives it back in so many ways, you can have zero ego, none at all. And it's hard because we're giving the community control over every word we write, over every action Michael asks them to do in the space, over everything. We're giving the community control. And the community means anybody, and that doesn't stop. So even once a play, if we do a performance thing, and it opens, if a community member comes in and tells us to change something, we change it, and anytime in the room, but the community gets it fast. And then like, we get this game. We're now in charge, and we're going to tell you what to do, and it's constant. And that's what we're here to do, because we want to get it right for that community, to represent them in that moment. And so you can have zero ego. Like I have no expectations about what these words are trying to do as a text-based artist, or what my movement is trying to do when I'm choreographing stuff. It's all on the community to make those choices and tell me I'm wrong and to tell me to change it. And it doesn't matter how much I like it. It's not about me. He and I get to do that work elsewhere. We're doing that work together in a lot of theaters, at Center Theater Group, at Guthrie, and all these other places. That's our work we get to do. That's a little more ego-based. This work is all about just taking away ego and constantly just being of service.
I think that actually pretty much gets it. I would just say something I think about a lot, and I think I've learned about a lot in my time at Cornerstone, and certainly in the last 10 years in the context of our collaboration. People talk a lot about leadership, and the director in the room theoretically is the person who's the leader of the particular process and the visionary of the process. And I think it's been a real problem in general in our society, and certainly in our field, that leadership is equated with sort of being at the front of things, at the head of things, people following you per se. You're not leading unless somebody's following, kind of idea. And I think that's been kind of toxic and problematic in a lot of rooms, and certainly a lot of processes. And I think the outcomes have not always been so fantastic because of that. Even like thinking about the work I do with Bamuti, that is a very circular process. It's, nobody is at the front of it. It's certainly Mark Bamunti's Joseph's vision, but we're figuring out how to articulate that vision, and each person in a circle brings that to the fore. I think the director's job is, in a way, to lead from beside or behind, right? And knowing when not to speak being much more important than knowing when to speak, defaulting to not speaking. You do not have to front that you know things. Right? You have to front that you have a sure sense of process, that you have, and that you're confident in your process and confident that over time we will get to a place. And that imbues, I think, other people in the group with confidence that we're going somewhere, but we're going together, right? You're not necessarily, follow me. And I think that's really important in the kind of work we do. And something I work on every day. It's a practice, and it takes a lot of self-discipline because it can make you terribly insecure not to know. All right. And it's not only not knowing the outcome, but really trusting that the outcome will come, and the outcome will come out of the room, and your job as director is to kind of see what's happening in the room and help it coalesce without necessarily having the failure of ego of thinking that I need to either put my stamp on it or it's not mine, which is not true. And if someone like Jean-Luc Godard could sort of work what was in the room and make it and not know beforehand what was going to happen, certainly the rest of us, I think, can probably do that too.
It also sounds like your framing of the directorial role and your approach also pushes back against a pretty traditionalist, sort of masculine, heteronormative, culture around what a director is, to begin with. So yeah, Godard. Who I love, but
R.I.P. Yeah.
But
yeah, he had a lot of problems. But he was very responsive to what happened, and I really admired that about him. There were a lot of other problems, but he really didn't know what the outcome was going to be in the room when he was shooting, and he was really responsive to what happened and taking that forward, but into a space that was not toxic, essentially.
Yeah. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about the actual series of works that you guys have worked on for a number of years, because you're coming into residence here at UMass and the Five Colleges community is kind of, these 10 days are sort of a bit of a testing ground. Maybe you can just kind of talk about your process, maybe give a couple of different examples, because as you said earlier, who knows what I don't want to call it final product, but who knows what the sort of consequence or result or manifestation, where you will arrive exactly. So what's happened all these years?
Yeah, glee. So yeah, all these years, so many years, 10 years. What's happened? We started, with our first project was called Urban Res, and it's with the indigenous peoples of the LA Basin, who have all been declared, they were in that clearinghouse in the 1950s where the federal government declared them all extinct, despite them standing there saying, hey, we're here. So there are no federally recognized tribes in all of LA and Orange County, although one in very southern Orange County looks like is about to get recognition. There are now a myriad of reasons why they cannot regain recognition from the federal government, despite a 30-year nonstop battle that's cost them everything to be recognized as existing. And so we started with those folks, and we will start with the people on whose land we're on, and that's whose land we're on, and we did engagement with those folks, and then as we developed that piece, we were thinking about, well, how do you reflect, right? We want to you need to have something to reflect their experience against, and we didn't want it to be against whiteness or necessarily even any other races. Michael himself is Cuban and grew up in Colombia, and we're like, and that's the Spanish-speaking Hispanic community is very large in Los Angeles, but it's like, actually, we didn't want to leave the indigenous folks, although we did include indigenous folks from south of the border in the piece ultimately. So we decided to reflect against relocation Indians, which is like myself, people who have been, but there was a huge government program for many years that paid Native people to leave reservations and move to urban centers. It was a way to try to, assimilation genocide, right? To get us to assimilate and disappear and be gone. So it's a different type of genocide that the government tried. And so Los Angeles was one of the main centers for that. And so we have so many Native people who are products, people who've continued to live there. So we started talking about, what is it for the local people of the LA Basin to be living on your land and yet be completely invisible, and what is it like then for these other people who are living on that land and have maybe never been to their homelands and feel invisible, and to have this is part of the hunger cycle, and so we talked about a hunger for culture and what that means to these different groups of people, and so that's what that piece ended up becoming, was all those people together and reflecting each other's experiences in different ways. Then the next piece, we thought we were done. And we took that nice picture on the poster, and that we were finished. And then we presented about that piece. We were asked to present at the Western Arts Alliance Conference in Los Angeles, and some folks from ASU Gamage were there, and we're like immediately in the space that we need to do that in Arizona. So long story, but we ended up through a 2-year investigative process with them, created Native Nation, which was another outdoor immersive piece with. Ultimately, we had, if you include, like with all the vendors and the marketplaces and everything, we had over 400 Native artists involved in that production, including 38 Native cast members. It was massive and amazing and completely different piece because we immediately got to we thought we were going to just do urban res in Arizona, but we got there and we went from a place of no federally recognized tribes to a place of 23 federally recognized tribes. It's completely, we obviously don't have the same story. And so we created a very different piece for them. And then that's where we met Michael Sakamoto right after that. We, not there, but that's when we met you, is when we were just finishing that piece. And started talking about that process here and what that would look like. That's all we have to say.
There's so much there. Maybe we can segue from that into one of the larger themes of this series and why we're all here these couple of weeks. Sustainability, and sustainability. You're looking very.
Sounds like a Michael question.
So sustainability, the term and the discourse, it's pretty broad, and it exists obviously in environmental discourse, but it also exists in the cultural realm, and this idea of cultural sustainability being braided in and inseparable from every other form of sustainability and survival. Michael, I think some of the work that you and Bamuti have done deals, pretty explicitly with that. So maybe just wondering about kind of your thoughts on what your work, your practice, how do you think of it as a form of facilitating cultural sustainability or some other form of sustainability, or how do you feel your practice or practices intersect with this idea, this issue?
I would say my immediate response to that is that I see the work that Larissa and I have done as more of perhaps an inquiry into sustainability, asking community, where they sit in relationship to feeling or being sustainable in the context of the United States of America, and yuck, and how whether and how to create a platform, a forum to amplify that conversation, both within the community and if the community desires, without the community, with audience, et cetera. And so, it isn't, I don't feel really for us to say anything about the community in terms of sustainability, but rather for the community to let us know where they are with regard to that and what they'd like to assert or question or enact in terms of sustainability. And both plays were very explicit, those two plays that Larissa talked about were very explicitly about both where the community is asserting its sustainability and where it feels a threat, right? We had sort of an amazing experience with Native Nation where we were invited to perform for the first weekend, it turns out, at the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, which is a reservation really right next to Phoenix area. And it, so, we had imagined, this was a piece that the audience was in a circle with our performers. We had these booths that people would move to, and different things would be happening. You would have a different group you moved with, and et cetera. And we had, et cetera. And there was a marketplace that was happening during, before, and after the show, and other acts. And we imagined that we could handle between 100 and 150 audience members, and about 600 people showed up. I think it was 600 people, and we were. I didn't know. I was like, oh my God. And we were trying to figure out how to address that, and the audience addressed it for us. They recognized the shape of the performance. They quite organically created the circle both in which the performance would happen and through which the performance would happen, and it went without any hitch at all. And we performed twice with a giant meal, what they called a feed in between, which was amazing. And some people stayed for the second half, some people left, more people came. It was quite amazing. And then afterwards, the lieutenant governor got up and of the reservation, and that was his title. And we, hadn't met with him yet. We'd met with quite a few people there in the government, but not him. And he got up and he said he'd like to speak and took the microphone and said he was really angry. And I was like, we're doomed. And he said, I'm angry because we're not talking about these things. And he started talking about the issues in the show that he feels were not being spoken of in the community, that we weren't having these conversations, not grappling with these issues. And he named several of the issues in the show and said this needs to be a launching point because we will be more healthy as a community, we will survive as a community by grappling with these issues. And it was quite wonderful, right? And that fulfilled for me, I think, I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I am, clearly. Mansplaining this whole thing, but there was sort of fulfilled a hope that we had, if not the hope we had for the show.
Yeah, and I also just have to say I forgot Wuchun. So we're in the middle of a show right now, Wuchun, which is with my people, and that's why we're just in the middle of it, and it's going to happen in the spring. So, but I think we're thinking a lot about sustainability, I think, there, because this will be the first show where we're touring almost exclusively to indigenous reservations that are very remote and very far from urban centers, and it's going to be a tour to incredibly remote places, and like, what does, what does the word sustainability mean when you're talking about people who are living by choice, very far away from the world and very separate, and then we're bringing this Western theatrical form, but also this indigenized version of it, and what it means to come to these places and in a sustainable way, and in a way that doesn't cause harm culturally, emotionally, personally, all these different, in every way. So how do we do these things responsibly? And obviously, we only go where we're asked. First off, we don't just show up somewhere. We, hey, here's what we do. Here's what we have to offer. Are you interested? And some people say no, and that's great. And so then we don't go back. And so I think we were thinking a lot about that because it's a little more complicated than in, say, an urban center like we've been in the last two shows, because it's a very different culture, a very different world, and how are we responsible about the way we enter it, and then the way we walk away leave it again. The exiting of that world is always a really huge responsibility that we put a lot of thought into.
I'm imagining the latest version of the project in South Dakota is even more sort of all those issues exponentially than in some of the more urban centers you've been in. Do you want to? Would you mind kind of talking about this latest version that you guys have been involved in, or is that still too much in process? We could go somewhere else.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's very. I think just because of that, because of the physical limitations of touring places that don't necessarily have electricity, that don't necessarily, will most likely be outside. They certainly don't have theaters, most of these places, So our past pieces have all been outdoors, so this will probably be too. But so that changes the structure of what we can tour, just because money's a real thing, and we pay people and we feed people. So we can afford, we're doing a much smaller cast, maybe up to 10 people that will be rehearsing together in a space in the Black Hills in this beautiful camp for quite a while. And then as we tour, there will be community involvement in each. It's written into the script, but it's also then, we'll see whatever the event is around each place. But also some of these places are very small, with only, 100 people live there. So we're talking a lot and thinking a lot about what do we do when we get somewhere where there's actually, there aren't any extra people to help us out, or everybody wants to watch, or how do you are involved and you watch because there's only 100 people in the entire community and for 50 miles. So we're just doing a lot of talking about that and figuring out we don't know yet what we're going to do, but I will say this is the most singularly scripted show we've done together in an Indigenous community because, again, when you're touring, the simultaneity and things that we've done in the past are incredibly difficult to do without a lot of rehearsal, incredible amount of rehearsal. So being able to bring community, we want to make it as easy as possible to bring community in every place we tour. So we had to kind of say, okay, we'll give up our touring actors have to have a pretty set thing around which the community can then form themselves, as opposed to creating it all together and doing this immersive thing we usually do. Anything else?
No, I'd just point out that, or say that our core cast, the one that will be touring, will be comprised mostly of community members. So we'll be auditioning and talking to folks and seeing who wants to be part of that. And we'll be they will be with us for 8 or 9 weeks. Again, it would be a paying job for them, but they will mostly be non-professional folk, some have never done theater before, who will be in the play in that touring cast alongside 2 or 3 professionals from our company or from our circles. And then in each community, the idea right now is that we will, if we can find a way that's safe and not harmful, bring people in to perform at each locale as well.
I have some other questions I want to ask Larissa and Michael, but I also want to open up to the audience. If you have any questions or invite you to ask questions if anything comes up for you between now and the end of the event. Does anybody have anything at the moment? Yeah, there's one. The question was, and for the virtual audience, when you go into a community, what is the first thing you say, and how do you welcome them into the project? Yeah.
Hi. But basically, yeah, I mean, it really is pretty straightforward. Introduce myself, introduce Larissa. Doing community engaged work is a lot of really grassroots movement type work. It's knocking on doors, talking to people, showing up multiple times, without harassing, and finding appropriate context in which to share that we're theater practitioners, and we would like to do a play in and with your community, for your community, in collaboration. And we talk about the ways that people would collaborate in terms of sharing story, in terms of being in the play, in terms of venue in the community, that we will not be extracting it and taking it somewhere else, unless that was a strong desire of the communities. And finding simple language in which to share that, being very clear that what we're not doing is looking for any kind of financial partnership whatsoever, that we take responsibility for our fundraising outside of the community. But we're looking for partnership. We're looking for folks who might want to help us within the context of the community in a way that makes sense for the community, find space that makes sense, find folks who are interested in that kind of thing. And just really sharing that information as clearly as possible many times. On paper, face-to-face, and just being clear and being open, and then asking what they imagine a play might look like. What should be in that play? What would they like to see, if in fact they're interested? And that's basically it. It's pretty straightforward, and also not, right?
I would also add the one thing that for us is important is we don't do docudrama, and so we're very clear about that. That's a choice for many reasons, but one of them being I'm not going to tell your story. Like I'm not going to have your name and your story. You said this, or a cultural story that's very specific. Like that's not for me. Again, that feels extractive. That I'm going to come in and take this story and make it into something. So he and I are making fictional stories. We're making up the people and the situations, and they're composites of, by the end, generally hundreds of people. But if you do it right and you listen and constantly listening and reflecting back and taking yourself out of it. It's fascinating how one character, 50 people will come to us and say, "Oh my gosh, you captured me perfectly," and it's all the 50 of those people believe that character is them, because we did our job and listened and kept reflecting back what community was saying, and they're a community member, so they saw themselves very clearly as that character with a different name. Yeah, so that's a big one for us.
I think we're also really careful to emphasize that community agency is is in the lead. So at any time, if anybody feels that their story is in it and they don't want it to be, it might even be after it's opened. If they feel that anything inappropriate is being done in the play, that we will have a process around that, we will address it, and we will take it out, right? And that we're very clear about that, very clear that we are not here to take ceremony and use, or anything, and use it in any kind of way that's inappropriate. And that, again, always open to change and seeking input from people so that we know to change immediately and process versus afterwards. And this notion of do it and apologize later is the opposite of what we would do. And we're trying to be very clear about that.
Yeah, what's the sort of one-sentence version of your question? Sorry, just for the virtual audience. An example of their process where the community can reshape.
In the immediate, in terms of the plays that we've done together, I can't think of anything. Sorry? Oh, I can't think of anything, a moment in which people have asked us to change after opening, that we're certainly open to that. But certainly at very late stages of the process, where I think in a conventional context you might feel that you were fairly, what are they called, set, frozen, whatever. We've had people come to us and talked about that. It's process is essentially sitting in a circle and talking about it. Getting as wide a community input as possible. Since we're in collaboration with community, that generally means our cast, it means community advisors, it means artists who we're working with, it means elders in the community that have been part of our process, official, whatever people, and getting as much input as possible, allowing the community conversation to happen, and sometimes facilitating that conversation if that is helpful, or often a person in the community winds up being the facilitator, and being attentive to what the ultimate decision of the group is. It takes time, and being open to that. Sometimes it means, okay, we're gonna not address this part of the play for a little while until we've decided. Sometimes it means we'll try different options of that play and then see where people land. And it's been about things that are both pretty thorny, as well as things that are seemingly simple but are not. Like, again, which direction should the circle move in was a big one that we really had to get a lot of input before we could determine that, what was appropriate, whether and how to use certain instruments, musical instruments is a big one. Different people, if we're working with people from different communities, their communities might have different ideas about that. So then who do we defer to, and asking that of the community for them to tell us. We had a storyline in a play that the community really wanted to be in the play that had to do with violence against trans people, but there was also concern in the community that if a person was either came out as trans in the roles it played or represented that they might be subject to violence from people in the audience. So that was a very thorny, ongoing conversation, because there was also a desire in the community not to disappear people, right? Not for them to be absent. And that was a long, ongoing conversation. How do we create a context, a proper theatrical context for that? It was very challenging. Ultimately, I think we came up with a good solution, but it was hard. So those are the kind of things that will come up.
I also just want to clarify, when Michael says, we made the decision, meaning this. Michael and I did not make a decision. I was thinking very specifically, like there was one, which you kind of alluded to, but I'll just be really specific about it. There was a moment where in Native Nation, where a song had been taught, that we had permission for the song from a community member that wanted them to sing this particular song, and there'd been actually a request around. And then there was dancing a dance that goes with it. And immediately we came across several people of the same tribe but different communities, and they're like, oh no, you have to do it like this, you have to, and it escalated pretty fast, crazy fast. And so we will not be the arbiters of a community, right? That's not our job. We should not be. No one should be. That community should be. Because we had 2 years of work and relationships with these elders, we came to them and said, so who can mediate this decision? We said, here are the people we know that have said they're willing to talk to us. And this one gentleman, as soon as I said his name, they said, yes, everyone agreed. He's the one that can mediate this. I said, great, let me call him. And so I called him. Michael moved on with rehearsal while I called and talked to him. And he said, totally understand why this is happening. This is the context of why this community is saying this and this community is saying this. He couldn't come in himself at the moment, but he gave me all this information and said, however, because this is the land we're standing on for this performance, it should be done this way. And you can tell them that's what I said. So I came in, I repeated all the things he said, and it was just done. It was like, great. And we moved on. And, again, it was neither of us making any choices about anything in that community. It was about they all agreed that this elder was the person. Now, sometimes it's a much longer process. That was a quick one. Like he said, often it can be a lot of sitting in circles and talking and talking and talking and finding out who, maybe we don't have the right elder to talk about this, so who do we find and how do we approach them and what do we do and blah, blah. What's the protocol to speak with that elder? There's a lot of protocol around how you speak to elders. We fortunately had already gone through that protocol with this gentleman. I was able to call on the phone.
Laura? Actually, why don't I hand her a mic?
Let's see. Thank you so much. So much to learn from and think about. I'm Lori Doyle, teach in the English department here. And I've been thinking a lot about teaching while you've been talking and how different and similar the circle situation is in the classroom and in the circles that you're creating and joining. Let's see if I can move this more quickly to a question or something that I want to ask for your thought on. And I'm also just very aware that there are students in the room, and this is where I live, and this is where I've taught for 25 years, and so I guess I'll just start by saying, it's similar to the practice I've been cultivating. I've had the word listening on my wall for 25 years. And it's just so moving. I feel I've been so moved in classrooms when this is what happens, when the circle belongs to everyone, when everyone speaks. So I guess there's somewhere in here a question or something. So obviously the institution teaching, the classes are, 90 minutes long or something. It can't go on forever. But you do have this whole long several month period with students. And maybe really what I'm wishing for is to hear from the students, your experiences maybe in classrooms. In a classroom, every community has all of its differences within. In a classroom, everyone is bringing their story, everyone's bringing their wish, their desire to communicate or not, and draw boundaries. So I don't know if any of this resonates for any of the people who, we're all still students, but any of you who are technically students right now, but it seems to me it could be fruitful to, as you're in this school setting, to have us reflect on what connections there might be here. So that was unplanned, but I'll just put it out there. Maybe there's some time.
Or maybe your thoughts on that in a school or university setting, like this, because your process, I think, is what Lori's really reacting to.
I would open it actually up to you guys for reflections on that. Larissa and I are both not particularly of the academy. And you know, I do think that the focus on process and the focus on creating more equitable circles is applicable to the classroom setting, to the workshop setting, to any, and as much as a creative setting. So I'd be eager to hear if anybody has any questions or reflections about that.
It's fun getting a mic. I mean, I'm a person who went to Montessori school like 1st through 8th grade, so I feel like that experience is quite similar with working with your peers and working in a circle to learn, which is something that I have not experienced as much being in college or in high school. When I went to a public high school, it's mostly listening and not collaborating, and I feel like collaboration is the key to learning, because I don't remember as many things unless I'm like talking about it with somebody as a very like visual and needing to kind of tactile learner. It's very hard to pay attention in a lecture and to really learn. So I find it helpful doing collaboration and working with other people, because I get opinions that I probably never would have thought of, especially with such a big university. There's so many differing opinions that we can learn from. So I definitely think collaboration is something that I am looking for in more classes, and as a STEM major, I barely see that in any of my STEM classes, but when it comes to my humanities, I see that a lot more, especially my theater, and in good classes, so good job, humanities, but.
Nerve-wracking. Ironically, for a theater major, microphones terrify me. So I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and there, unfortunately, school tends to be very much show up, say hello to the teacher, and listen for the rest of the day, and that was it. And it wasn't necessarily hard for me to learn, but it was a lot of hours into talking to other people about what we were talking about in class and what we were learning. Unfortunately, Puerto Rico's educational system is a lot, I guess, not working in decolonization, so we don't really get to learn the real story of our country, of our land and our country and who we really are. So I do have to say, now being a theater major here, it's been like kind of like a fresh air right on my face of getting to a class and professors being like, what do you think about this? And it's like, oh, okay, I can learn. I don't have to actually do so much homework and so much tutoring and so much practice and so much reading outside of class, because I get to talk about it. Like, people learn practicing. Like, you can read an entire manual to something and then go work the thing and be like, how do I turn it on again? But once you like fibble with it, I feel like people learn a lot more. So kudos to all the professors that run discussion-based classrooms, because you get to hear a lot from other people's experience and not just one person telling you how things are and it feeling kind of like a doctoring more than anything else. So yeah.
I was also going to say that I think it's, I think what you're saying made me think about how both formal education in a setting like this and community engagement, you know, which is with a little capital C and the capital E, what we do looks so different than what people think it looks like. I mean, literally, it's just us wandering around. It's a huge amount of what we do, just wandering around and chatting with people. You know, we find, you know, our best, not our best, but like an incredible partner that stays with us for years at the mini mart, you know, when we strike up a conversation, or you know, an artist in a gallery, or, you know, someone, you know, it's so informal. The majority of what we do is, and it's sometimes hard, even for people like Michael to have to, Sakamoto here, to have to explain, like, we're just gonna wander around. Like, that's what we're gonna do. And we talk to people and we get to know people and we say, hey, you know, who else should we talk to? Who else should we get to know? And then they lead us to another person, and then suddenly there's a room of people. And that's, you know, we talk about, you know, talking circles and all these things, but the vast majority of our time is spent wandering around and chatting with folks. Or we went and looked at the Minuteman and the And the other statues here, what is it? Yeah, the spirit of the red men or whatever it is. Yeah, it says red men on it. So we go and we strike up conversations with people while we're looking at them. We do a lot of just chatting with people and saying, oh, well, who else should we know? Or they may not be indigenous, but they met someone when they went to talk about that statue, and then they tell us about it, and suddenly we're into a new person. And so that's the vast majority of community engagement work is just wandering around, being friendly, and chatting with people. And I'm fortunate, I guess, in my world as a writer, that people seem to feel a deep need to tell me their life. And on the bus, on the grocery store, I know unbelievably deep, painful things about so many people in this world whose names I do not know, which is great. But that's part of then, I guess, the gift that I have to be able to do this work, that people want to tell me things and I seem to be trustworthy with your stories. And so, just chatting with people is where we get a huge, huge amount of our connections that then become more, as the time goes on, become more and more formal until it ends up in whatever the arrival of the journey will be. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Madeline. I work at the Du Bois Library. What you're describing, this wandering around, it strikes me as how mycelium is formed. The threads that go down into the soil. They find what needs nourishing and what gets nourished, and it creates rich, fertile ground for things to grow in. So I just wanted to offer that metaphor, because it's really beautiful what you're doing. And as soon as I walked in today, I felt this kindredness. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
Hi. So, you've mentioned circles and like a circular process a lot. And something that really struck me is when you talked about you don't just go into a community to make art, you go into a community and meet the needs of the community. And so I was just wondering, has that process and the process that you've sort of created through Cornerstone, how has that affected other parts of your life outside of your work and just how you see and view the world?
I will say I find it hard to separate the part of my life that is making the work from the part of my life that isn't. Doesn't feel very separate. Certainly how I try to be present in the room and in the present is quite different than it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I would say that my journey at Cornerstone, and certainly my journey in this work in the past 10 years, has been about how to be present in the room, how to take space, how to make space, et cetera, and finding different ways to articulate that, but that's essentially what it's been. I think I enter other rooms similarly in ways that I would have entered those rooms differently, 10 years ago, whether that's a room that's about conversation that's political, the conversation that's familial. I'm just in those rooms differently, thinking about that. I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and I'd say similarly, yeah. As an artist, there's really no separation from personal and professional because, and I don't mean, yes, also doing emails, 24 hours a day. But in addition to that, I love what I do so much. I respect everybody that needs boundaries and whatever. I love what I do so much, I wish I could do it 24 hours a day. So when people make me stop after 15 hours, it's a real bummer, even no matter how tired I am. I'm married an artist, our lives are entirely about because we love what we do so much. I don't understand people that don't want to do their job 24 hours a day, because I'm really privileged that I do, and so I wish I could do more than 15 hours a day, because that's how much I love everything I do. It's just a bummer that my body won't let me do more than that. But that said, there isn't a separation, because everything you do feeds into your art and everyone you encounter and every experience you have. I will say something I was talking about with someone the other day. I will say specific to working with Michael, because he didn't grow up in this country. It's really, working with him specifically has been so helpful to me, because as an Indigenous person that grew up in the United States of America, I'm deeply colonized, crazy colonized. I'm endlessly like, whoa. And because he didn't grow up here, he asks a lot of questions and interrogates the way we do things in this country in a very different way, and it's not always intentional. Sometimes it's just like I tease him a lot about these, because we're similar in age. We're only a few years apart, but he has these culture holes, or like depending on what made it to Columbia at that time, pre-internet, and what didn't, he has these weird culture holes that I'm always like teasing him about, because he'll understand this but not that, or something completely weird for our age group. But in that joking and the cultural things, also though, I get to see a lot of things reflected back about our country that make me realize how incredibly colonized I am. And just his always inquiry, even if it's something as silly as, different eras of heavy metal, like it makes me really think about like why I see these things this way, or why I accepted certain norms in this country and the way I do things. And so I will say, as a collaborator, that's been really specific for me in having someone that wasn't brought up, even though he's not indigenous, he was brought up outside of all of it. And it really helps me endlessly to be able to reframe how I'm looking at things and interrogate that for myself in this work.
The different eras of heavy metal are not silly, I just want to say.
I think we have time for maybe one more question if anybody has anything. Yeah.
I have another nuts and bolts question. When you are in circle and in community and you are devising work, do you break into groups and then do you oversee? Do you have a dramaturg? Do you collect? You, Larissa, I know you don't want to have hierarchical roles, but do you take it on as a writer at some point? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that process.
Yeah. Also, I just want to say thank you for bringing your baby here. I really appreciate that. Actually, like with Diné people, the Navajo, you can't have any gathering of substance without a baby, because they still have a connection to Creator that we can all benefit from by their presence in the room. So I was so happy when I saw that you brought your baby here. And that's actually part of like it made me think about something we haven't said, that when we get to rehearsals or even in any rooms, everyone's welcome in our spaces. And it's interesting when other people come from the outside, they're like, wow, how do you guys do anything? Because it seems like chaos, because there's kids and there's elders and there's dogs and there's children and toys, and parents are trying to perform, and their 2-year-olds running up and needing things, and we're holding them and they're holding them, and all the things. And we do have caregivers in the room, but if the baby wants to talk to mom while she's on stage, she talks to mom. So all the things are happening at once, and I just want to be. That reminded me that our rooms are always open to your whole life. And to bringing everybody, and then we'll support you in that. And we also always feed people. Anyway, that being said, so Michael and I work incredibly collaboratively from day one. We're in everything. However, we do, for the sake of the room at the moment, we do have like lanes of I'm still called writer and he's still called director. However, we cross them endlessly. But I think that's also just helpful just for the efficiency of getting something done. Right, that we do continue that. And so and I always tell people in our rooms, I said, basically I'm the typist, right? So that really is what I'm doing. Yes, I'm taking all these things, and I'm taking my skills that we call writer, and I'm taking all these hundreds of people and synthesizing them into these few characters, and that's ultimately my job, is to be the typist, and that I am fortunate to have some skills to do that. And then ultimately in the room, I always defer to his position as director, to be the person that is the support and is behind people, helping them move forward in a way together, and keeping, because that is challenging, not only with these large casts, but with all the children and all the dogs and all the grandmas, keeping everybody going to some destiny is an incredible amount of work, especially when you're leading from behind. It's so much harder. It could be a lot easier for him to just stand in front and say, here's where we're going, let's go, and tell people how to do it. But because of the way that Michael works and that we work together, it's incredibly more difficult to stay behind 40 people plus all their children and elders and dogs and keep them going towards some sort of destiny. So we do definitely do that. However, we work, yet between us, everything's constantly collaborative. in support of the community collaboration. So it's a constant dance back and forth and side to side, and trying to help keep that circle together and keep it moving somewhere. All right, that's it.
I was going to ask my last question, but I think did you raise your hand at the same time you did? Do you want to, here, why don't, I'd rather have a student ask the last question.
Well, it's kind of, a lot of people already like talked about this, so I guess it's kind of like a wrap up, but you guys talk about, you know, your like non-hierarchical structure and like working with the community and what that looks like, and facilitating sometimes, and other times other people facilitating. So I was just wondering how you deal with like conflict, and like, cause like in any, like I'm thinking of specifically organizing, but like organizing for art is organizing, but yeah, how do you guys deal with like, not necessarily like the theater group like having disagreements with the community, but like the community having disagreements with the community? And you kind of mentioned that with about the dance and things, but yeah, how does that process of like conflict resolution happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, it can vary wildly depending on the community you're working with and depending on what the nature of the conflict is. But generally, we would have a process around that in some cases can involve the entirety of the community present, and in other cases involves very specifically the people involved in the situation. But you're seeking to sort of address harm, mitigate future harm, acknowledge, and find a way to reconcile. And so we'll go through a process with that, you know. And it can be really hard because even within communities, there are cultural differences and there are different understandings of things. You know, an easy situation was a community member in a show that was not one of ours, that this guy kept showing up with a six-pack. And we were like, and it was multi-generations, and he just kept showing up with a six-pack, and he'd alcohol in his breath, and I'd be like, dude, you can't. And he was very confused by the whole thing. And then we suddenly realized, you know, he's a punk musician. Like showing up to rehearsal meant showing up with a six-pack. Like that was his expectation. And so we really had to break it down for him, and you know, but other people in the room were quite upset about it, so we had to have a whole conversation among everybody with it, so that we could also take judgment off of him, but also lead him to understand it. So it was ultimately kind of funny, but there was really a gap in the communication for a while between him not understanding what he was doing wrong, and us not understanding why he wasn't hearing what other people needed. And that's a very light one. There's certainly more heavy situations, but it generally tends to be, you know, again, a process. It can take a lot of time, and understanding that is not time wasted at all. That is part of the process of making the play, right?
Yeah, and I would say too that, just for clarity, because in what he was saying, when we talk about the process, we always start with the cultural, like, what are the cultural protocols of those people we're dealing with? So when he says that, he means culturally specific process. So, you know, we always find, is there, because often, you know, different cultures have a specific protocol that you follow in that situation. So just to be clear, that when he says that, that's where we always start, is there a cultural protocol around conflict and resolution? Is there someone, you know, it's really easy in some Native communities, it's just like the elder in the room gets to, you know, be the final, so great. Grandma said no. Moving on. So, you know, that's really handy. So, you know, but so that, just to be clear, that's where when he says that, he means cultural process first, and then our own internal process together.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. I want to thank, please let's have a round of applause for Larissa and Michael. And again, please, if you haven't seen our Art Sustainability Activism series flyer and poster, take one home, put it up on the wall, it looks great, and come to our other events and look for us every year. And on we go.
Thank you.